All right, welcome back to the listener's commentary on the Gospel of John. The listener's commentary is a listener supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that is made possible by the generosity of tons of people just like yourself. And to each and every one of you who make this ministry possible, let me just say a huge thank you. God is using your generosity to bear fruit all around the world. And if you've been impacted in some way by the listener's commentary, would you prayerfully consider joining the team of supporters? The easiest way to do that is to go to listenerscommentary.com, click the Give button. It'll redirect you to a page, my page, through World Family Mission, where you can set up a one-time gift, or you can click a little box that says Make This Monthly and set up a recurring monthly donation as well. Thanks a ton in advance for your support. All right, in this recording, we are going to be looking at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And in context, Jesus' ministry is now getting underway. When you read chapter 1, he's been in the area where John the Baptist is baptizing. He's actually called some of his first few disciples. And this episode picks up right there. In fact, it picks up by maintaining the sequence of days from chapter 1. So chapter 2, verse 1 opens with, on the third day. And so that forces us to go back and remember what happened on day 1 and day 2. So day 1, Andrew follows Jesus and finds his brother Simon Peter. On day 2, Philip and Nathanael join Jesus and they head into Galilee. Now we're on day 3, and what happens on day 3 is a wedding in a particular village in Galilee. And so it says this, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Cana of Galilee is a village that's not mentioned in the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but it comes up several times in John's Gospel. We learn in chapter 21, for example, that Nathanael, one of those disciples that Jesus called in chapter 1, Nathanael is from Cana. We hear that in 21:2. We also know that Jesus was in Cana when he healed an official's son from a distance. The official was from Capernaum. His son was sick and dying in Capernaum. And Jesus gave the word, sent the official back, said, your son will live. And that's in Capernaum. And so that happened in Cana as well. And as best as we could tell, it was located on a large plain west of the Sea of Galilee, kind of right in the heart of the region of Galilee. And there has been some question as to the exact location of Cana, but the most likely spot is about 8.5 miles north of Nazareth. So it's close to Jesus' hometown. It's pretty central to a lot of the region of Galilee. And there is a wedding being hosted there. And Mary, Jesus' mom, is at that wedding. And verse 2 says, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And so Jesus and his friends are invited as well. Now, since Mary was invited and since Jesus is invited, it actually suggests that they were in some way connected to the people getting married, to the families involved in the wedding. And the following request that Mary is going to make in this story also suggests that they weren't just casual guests, that they had some sort of role or at least had some sort of connection to the wedding party itself. So they're at this wedding, and here's what happens. Verse 3. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. We need to remember that weddings in Jesus' world were week-long affairs. They involved tons of people from the village and from surrounding villages. It was a really massive party that would go on for 5, 6, 7, or sometimes even longer days. And so we're a ways into this wedding festival, this wedding celebration, and the wine runs out. And Mary comes and reports to Jesus that they have no wine. And the question is Mary merely reporting this fact, or is there an implicit request for Jesus to do something? Certainly in the context of the Middle East and the hospitality expectations of that time and that place, this is a real problem. Running out of wine at your wedding feast, this is a real problem, a real cause for shame and dishonor on this family. And so that's a big deal. And Jesus' response indicates that he actually understood her to be asking him to do something, and something that actually might draw attention to himself. So look at how he responds in verse 4. Jesus said to her, What business do you have with me, woman? My hour has not yet come." So Jesus' response actually seems to suggest that he took her reporting this fact of them having no wine as asking him to do something, and something that would actually draw attention to him as Messiah. That seems to be what he's getting at when he says, "My hour has not yet come." And his response to his mom could easily sound pretty kind of gruff or terse to our ears, right? "What do you have to do with me, woman?" And it could sound very disrespectful. But in their culture, this was actually a sign of respect. So to address his mom as woman needs to be heard as you read that with tenderness and respect. "What business do you have with me, woman?" He's speaking respectfully and tenderly to his mom. And then he says, "My hour hasn't come." And in John's gospel, this idea of my hour, it's important. It actually comes up multiple times in John's gospel where he says, "My hour hasn't come," or John himself says his hour hadn't come. And then when Jesus is crucified, then we get his hour has come. And so that's the climactic moment in John's gospel when Jesus' time, his hour has come, is at his crucifixion. And so this statement really is not saying that his ministry hasn't begun, because we know his ministry is sort of getting underway. It's that his time for conflict, his time to draw attention to himself, his time to begin to gain notoriety that will lead to his crucifixion, Jesus is trying to hold off on that for as long as he can. Nevertheless, whatever his tone of voice was, whatever the look on it in his eyes were when he said this, the way he said it, something about the way he said it indicated to Mary that he would do something. So she follows up Jesus' reply with this. Look at verse 5. His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he tells you to do, do it." And then John actually gives some good detail about how the miracle plays out, how it goes down. Look at verse 6. Now, there were 6 stone water jars, water pots, standing there for the Jewish custom of purification. So these are ritual water pots that were used for purification rites. And there's 6 of them standing there, each of them containing, John says, 2 or 3 measures. 2 to 3 measures is quite a bit of water. Each measure is about 9 gallons. So 2 to 3 is, we're talking somewhere between 20 to 30 gallons each. And there's 6 of them. So you're looking at 120 to 180 gallons of water. Maybe some of them still had some water in them, who knows? But all 6 is going to hold a lot of water. And Jesus, verse 7, said to them, to the servants, "Fill the water pots with water." Now pause to think about this. This is no easy task. In their time and place, you can't just turn on the hose and fill up the water pots. You're going to have to collect water from somewhere else, a spring, a well, a cistern, something like that, and you're going to have to bring it back. You're going to have to haul it back to the site of the wedding, pour it into the water pot, go and get some more, bring it back, pour it into the water pot until all of them are filled up. Have you ever carried a 5-gallon bucket full of water? It's heavy. It's a lot of work. And they're going to have to transport tens of gallons of water from somewhere in town back to the site of the wedding in order to fill up these water pots. So Jesus says, "Fill up the water pots with water." And then John simply reports, so they did. They filled them up to the brim. And then Jesus said to them, "Draw some out. Draw out some of this water that you got from the town well or got from the spring near town and pour it into these water pots. Draw out some of that water now and take it to the head waiter." The head waiter is like the master of the ceremonies. He's the one who's kind of organizing things and running the show for this week-long wedding celebration. So they do. They draw out some water and they took it to him. And here's what happens, verse 9 and 10. Now, when the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, somehow in them pouring it into the pot, it now has become wine. And so they've taken not just water, actually wine to the head waiter. So when the head waiter tasted the water, which had now become wine, and did not know where it came from, but, in a parenthesis, the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the groom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the guests are drunk, or maybe better, have had plenty to drink, then he serves the poorer wine. But you've kept the good wine until now." Notice that. that when Jesus turned water into wine, he didn't just make kind of, bare bones, box wine. He made good stuff. He made good wine. This is the better wine, better than the best stuff that was served at the beginning of the feast. And so this wine has become super good wine. This, John tells us, verse 11, is the beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. One thing to note is when it says this beginning of his signs, literally is not beginning, but first. This is the first of his signs, and Jesus did it in Cana of Galilee and revealed his glory. John counts off the first two signs. So this is the first sign. And then we'll get the second sign. And then after that, John leaves us, the reader, to count the rest of the signs that he includes in his gospel. So this is the first sign that Jesus did. So Jesus' first sign was turning water to wine in Cana of Galilee. And John says, by doing so, he revealed his glory. He revealed his power. He revealed in some sort of way his glory. More on that in just a second. And his disciples believed in him. We're not told exactly what they believed, but however they understood this to manifest or display his glory, now they're increasing their confidence in him. They're increasing their belief in who he is and what he's going to do. After this, verse 12, Jesus went down to Capernaum. And so he stopped by Cana at this wedding, and then he goes down to Capernaum. And we know from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those three Gospels, that Capernaum actually became his headquarters for ministry in Galilee, that he spent a lot of his time there and kind of launched out into ministry from Capernaum. And it was a very strategic location. It was a town that was on the major crossroads. As a result of that, there were all sorts of different kinds of people that lived there as well as traveled through there. So you had a strong Roman presence, you had tax collectors there, you had visitors from various places through there. And so it's a little bit more multicultural than a lot of the other places in Galilee. So it's a good place for Jesus to sort of set up his base of operations, do ministry, as well as teach and train his disciples and model for them how to interact with all sorts of different kinds of people. So he goes down to Capernaum, and he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples all went there, and they stayed there for, it says, a few days. Now, we don't know exactly how this fits into the exact chronology of Jesus' ministry, but we do know that Jesus is going to stay there much longer, ultimately, than just a few days. Maybe his mom and brothers went back to Nazareth after this, not sure. But Jesus at some point is going to set up his base of operations in Capernaum, and he's going to really carry out his ministry from there to all of Galilee. Now, as we kind of wrap up this little episode, I suspect that for John, there's more to this sign than just saving a groom from dishonor and shame at his wedding. I suspect there's more than just even showing that Jesus has the power somehow to turn water into wine. Both of those two things are true. I just don't think that those are the only two things that are true, and here's why. In the Old Testament prophets, wine is connected to the age of the Messiah. So, for example, let me read you from the prophet Joel in the Old Testament, Joel chapter 3, verse 18. It says that in the days when the Lord returns to his people and restores their fortunes, here's what's going to happen. The mountains will drip with sweet wine. The hills will flow with milk. All the brooks of Judah will flow with water. And a spring will go out from the house of the Lord and water from the valley of Shittim. Notice that the mountains will drip with sweet wine. Or another example is Isaiah chapter 25, verses 6 and following. There, Isaiah says that on the day when God defeats death and brings in the fullness of salvation, there will be a lavish feast that includes, Isaiah says, the best wine. This is a promise of abundance and joy and celebration. So it seems to me that in keeping with the story he's telling, and in keeping with really the way he tells that story to show that Jesus, in a certain sort of way, fulfills Jewish expectations, fulfills Jewish rituals, fulfills the temple services and the temple worship. John is telling his story unto that end. Well, it certainly makes sense in this context with ritual water pots for John to begin to help us see that these kinds of promises of the days of salvation coming, that they're being inaugurated by Jesus in this moment, as wine now is appearing on the scene almost out of nowhere, that Jesus is fulfilling this promise, this expectation that the days of salvation will be a day when there's good wine to be had. And so the sign isn't merely showing Jesus' power to turn water into wine, but to bring in the wine promised in the age of fulfillment. And I think that's partly what John is getting at when he says that Jesus revealed his glory by doing this, and the disciples believed in him. They're looking at this, and they're already beginning to get a sense that this one has incredible power. This one is doing things that other people haven't done. And maybe indeed these promises, these hopes, these longings are actually going to come true.